and some of them are actually being very generous. It just really, I wonder, you know, where all these people are coming from exactly and what are they representing? Because do you have people from ISIS in that group? You know, there's a lot of security risk with it, but something has to be done. It's an unbelievable humanitarian problem.
Israel's not taking any. Britain's taking a few, maybe 5,000. You know thousands will come to the United States of migrants. Now, do you object to migrants who are getting out of the Middle East and North Africa? Do you object to them coming to the USA?
I hate the concept of it, but on a humanitarian basis with what's happening, you have to. You know, this was started by President Obama when he didn't go in and do the job when he should have, when he drew the line in the sand, which turned out to be a very artificial line. But, you know, it's living in hell in Syria. There's no question about it. They're living in hell.
So you would have intervened.
Has to be done.
Had you been president, you would have intervened in Syria? You would have removed Assad as the president of that country?
Well, you know, Obama said he was going to do that, and the problem you have is that Russia is on his side, Iran is on his side, and lots of other things can happen.
But what would you have done? Would you have
been very strong?
After the gas? After the gas.
The amazing thing, after the gas, something should have happened.
What would you have done? What, in hindsight?
Well, Probably, in retrospect, they should have gone in and they should have done something with Assad. But, you know, Assad is not our biggest problem because Assad and ISIS are actually fighting.
Yes.
So now what we're doing is we're fighting ISIS, and ISIS wants to fight Assad. And some people could say, why don't you just let them fight out and you take off the remnants? We're stopping. Assad has to say, these people are the nicest people on earth. They're fighting my enemy. But Assad has the benefit of having Russia and having Iran protecting him.
But now you're going to have millions, literally. Now that all of these migrants are going to Europe and being accepted, millions more will come. And I think that catastrophe is going to play out over the next 6 months. All right, let's go back to the United States.
Well, Europe is becoming a much different place. Bill, I have to say, Europe is becoming a much different place. I was in Paris, and Paris doesn't look like Paris anymore. You look at what's going on with some of the major cities and some of the major countries in Europe, and even before this, it's a much different place. And I'm not sure that's what they want. But on a humanitarian basis, something does have to be done.
Are angry about the U.S. economy, which is not providing enough good jobs, and about... Since Ronald Reagan declared amnesty for illegal aliens in 1986, estimates are as many as 15 million undocumented people who did not get amnesty have crossed into the USA. As Donald Trump points out over and over, the southern border is a joke. Now the same thing is happening in Europe. Countries are being overrun by migrants, mostly Muslims, fleeing terror and economic deprivation in the Middle East and North Africa. These poor people are desperate and deserve sympathy from all of us. But the cold truth is Europe is getting what it deserves. In the face of Islamic terrorism, the EU, not an equal partner with America, it lets us take most of the casualties and pay most of the bills. If a combined Europe had stepped up in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria the way it should have, those conflicts would have been contained. A well-coordinated American-European power push would have crushed the jihadists a long time ago and would have badly damaged Iran as well. But Europe has basically sat it out. Thus, it was left to Presidents Bush and Obama to manage the Middle Eastern mess, and neither man could do it. President Bush lost control of the Iraq War, and President Obama has made things even worse. Let's begin in October 2011, when the brutal dictator Gaddafi was killed in the Libyan uprising.
Today, the government of Libya announced the death of Muammar Gaddafi. This marks the end of a long and painful chapter for the people of Libya, who now have the opportunity to determine their own destiny in a new and democratic Libya.
But the Libyans did not get any opportunity to do anything, because Europe and President Obama got the hell out of that country as fast as possible, leaving Islamic militias to run wild. Now hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing the chaos in Libya and coming through Libya. Just 2 months after the Gaddafi announcement you just saw, President Obama removed all American troops from Iraq. Our forces were providing stability and were keeping Iran from dominating Iraq. Nevertheless, Mr. Obama pulled the troops out.
Now, Iraq's not a perfect place. It has many challenges ahead. But we're leaving behind a sovereign, stable, and self-reliant Iraq with a representative government that was elected by its people. We're building a new partnership between our nations.
In hindsight, that statement is ridiculous. As soon as our troops left Iraq, the Iranians moved in, persecuting the Sunni minority, who then allowed ISIS to take up residence. So Iraq, along with Syria, became ISIS strongholds. That was perhaps President Obama's biggest foreign policy mistake. Then, in 2013, Mr. Obama learned that Syrian dictator Assad was using poison gas to kill civilians, innocent people. Mr. Obama threatened Assad with military action, and Europe should have immediately supported that. But the European leaders did nothing, and Mr. Obama backed down.
So even though I possess the authority to order military strikes, I believed it was right, in the absence of a direct or imminent threat to our security, to take this debate to Congress.
Of course, Congress didn't do anything. And ISIS gained power in Syria, murdering thousands of people along the way. Now, millions of Syrians are fleeing their own country, heading for Turkey and Europe. So you can see, a combination of cowardice and bad policy has led to one of the biggest mass migrations in history. In Europe right now, the crisis is so intense, the entire European Union may collapse. Eastern European countries like Hungary and Poland do not want to take any Muslim refugees. Countries like Denmark and the Netherlands also don't want any migrants. Even Great Britain and Ireland say they will take very few. So where are these people going to go? Germany's being overrun. Remember, migrants must be supported. Governments must house and feed them. It will take decades before the migrants assimilate into European societies, if they ever do. And this mass migration is not going to stop. Once people in Africa find out they can move to Europe without consequence, millions will begin to do so.
Up on the beach like a piece of driftwood really seemed to bring this problem into focus, didn't it?
It's amazing how most Americans, among others, were sleeping until we saw that one little boy and it humanized things, and then over the pictures of the camp. I mean, this is the perfect storm of humanitarian disasters where there are all sorts of contributors. But one thing which I think has been not noted, this is also a national security problem of the first order. We stand to lose a generation of refugee kids who are not properly educated or employed. And this is where our fear of terrorism redoubles on itself. On our one hand, we don't want these folks coming in because we worry about potential terrorism. On the other hand, this international failing of the first order is creating a whole generation of dislocated people, which could really be problematic in the very ways we fear most.
With this flood of refugees, Robert, you're seeing a very troubling split inside the European Union. Some of the richer countries, like Germany, have been very generous in accepting and sheltering refugees, but some of the countries that don't have that kind of money have been, and Hungary may be the prime example, one, have been much more reluctant to bring in refugees and are opposed to the EU's idea of setting quotas on how many migrants each country is going to take.
You're seeing countries, especially those that are having economic problems, they're not trying to bring in all of these migrants. At the same time, this issue is becoming more of one even in American politics. I checked in with the campaign and said, how are you handling this? Their first reaction is, it's a Barack Obama problem. It's President Obama's policy with Syria. But they expect the second debate that they have to have a policy idea ready. If Europe is not ready to handle this situation, what is the United States' role?
Well, and that's a really interesting question, Susan, because as Greg Palcott pointed out, so far the U.S. has accepted somewhere between 1,000 and 1,800 refugees from Syria in the last year. So the question is, do we accept more? And Rick talked about a national security aspect. There's also the national security aspect. If you start bringing in thousands of refugees, might some of them be terrorists.
Well, I suppose it's possible, although we recognize our obligation if people have a well-founded fear of persecution in their homeland, that they get some international rights and some humanitarian treatment. You can hardly argue that the people of Syria do not face a well-founded fear of persecution in their homeland. The United States has an obligation there. And if we expect countries in Europe to step up to the plate with this, surely the United States is going to be forced to step up in a more serious way than taking 1,000 or 1,500 Syrian refugees. There are, what, 4 million Syrian refugees? Much greater numbers are going to come here. And I would also say that the United States has been well served by previous waves of refugees that we've accepted, by the Vietnamese refugees that we accepted after the Vietnam War, who have become a great part of our nation. So we worry about terrorism. You can't look at these biblical pictures of people walking down miles and miles seeking just humanitarian treatment and not be touched.
George.
Well, first, yes, shortly after we took in 1 million refugees from Vietnam, after Vietnam fell, about 10, 15 years later, there are a whole bunch of high school valedictorians named Nguyen all over California, so we benefited from immigrants there. One of the questions here is this our fault because of what happened in Syria? I don't think we started the Syrian war. I don't think we had civil war. I don't think we have a recipe for ending it. The real problem is Syria. Libya. A lot of the refugees from Syria come overland into Europe or on a much safer trip by water to Greece. The really dangerous trip is across the Mediterranean to Italy from Libya. In August 27th rather, 2 boats carrying 500 people from Libya sank. In April, 800 people drowned trying to get from Libya. Now, what happened to Libya? That is our fault. We went in a country that posed no conceivable threat to the United States, and in an 8-month protracted assassination attempt, decapitated their government, creating the failed state that today is producing all this. And some presidential candidates, both the former Secretary of State and some Republicans who were enthusiasts for the Libyan intervention, are going to have to answer for this. One further point. Some estimates are that as many as 500,000 refugees are now besieging Europe in the first 8 months of this year. That's 1/20th, actually less than 1/20th, of the number of human beings that Donald Trump proposes to deport.
Well, I have to wrap my mind around that for a minute. So are you saying that you think that the U.S. should be more proactive in bringing in refugees to this country, that we did it in the case of Vietnam and we can do it here?
Vietnam, we clearly had a particularly intense obligation because we'd fought a war, sought allies, and lost. But it is part of our national heritage to do our duty.
But I'm not sure there's a political appetite for that. I mean, I was just in Mobile, Alabama with Trump, covering Trump in Iowa. The people who are supporting the Republican frontrunner don't seem to be in that mindset. So it's going to be hard for a lot of these Republican contenders if they see the human condition here, but they also they're trying to win a primary. I don't see the voters pushing for this in the GOP.
Well, the president needs to step up. I mean, he's in office right now. He needs to talk about what he can do in terms of letting in migrants, of international aid, of even using the Sixth Fleet to stem this tragedy at sea that we have going on. But we also need the Arab Gulf states to come in. We need a coordinated response from Europe, led by Germany. This is something which can't wait on politics. People need to step up now.
You want to fuel terrorism? Don't do anything about this refugee. If you're worried about terrorists, just let the situation continue to fester.
But there's another aspect to that, and that is, and George alluded to it, in addition to talking about Libya, which is Syria. I mean, Syria is a failed state, and it is bleeding its problems all across Europe. And, we now hear the Russians may be coming into Syria. The slaughter of one ethnic religious group of another continues.